Do you think, lastly, you think the defense is where they should focus? I mean, next year, because I know they may get a receiver at number 4, but do you think just with the quarterback situation, you think it's better to after that just build the defense up and have that be a strong point while your offense comes around? I was listening to Solomon Wilcott yesterday, and he was making a case of taking a defensive player at 4 and again at 35, to make sure the defense doesn't allow as many points while your offense comes around. Do you think that this defense is good enough to carry the team already, or you think they need to add new players?
I think there needs to be some tweaks if you can add a player or two, whether in free agency or the draft, to kind of fortify things. I think linebacker is going to be extremely interesting if we go under new work rules and Brandon Johnson isn't here. I think linebacker depth could be a concern. Safety's a definite question mark right now because Roy's an unrestricted free agent. In the last 2 years, they've gotten decimated as far as injuries there. So there are some areas they got to fortify. I just think this defense has to play a lot better than it did last year. And I think in the second half, it came around. If they can get consistent rushing to quarterback, if they can figure out where Michael Johnson fits in, whether it's as a D lineman in that Fisher-Price package or at the strong side linebacker, figure out where he's going to fit, put him there, and keep him there, and let him develop. And maybe, if you can add to that, but I think, as Zim said, these guys got a chip on their shoulder the way they played last year. I mean, let's face it, twice in 3 games last year, they allowed a 300-yard quarterback, a 100-yard receiver, and a 100-yard rusher. That's not good if you do that once a year. They did it twice. The plus 20 runs, the letting of the big passes. Hall and Joseph, to me, just weren't as aggressive as they were last year, but I think it starts with that defensive front. If they can get the consistent pressure and get sacks, I think things will start turning around and developing again, but they've got to play a lot better, and you got to start building an offense for the long term right now.
And we didn't touch on the linebackers, but do you think that Ray is ready to play Mike Backer and they're ready to let go of Dhani? Because, I mean, just playing there, I know Dhani really solidified the defense, just his way of communicating with the players, his way of getting the huddle together, taking the calls from the sideline, being a leader in practice and on game day. Do you think Ray is ready to take that role, or they should leave him in a position where he can just go play and not have to worry about everybody else?
I think if you can re-sign Dhani for one more year, I think you try to do it. But I don't know if Dhani wants to be back for another year and on just a one-year deal. He's kind of getting up there on years in his career and everything. Does he want to go to a playoff contender and maybe try to do that for a year or two and then retire and go into TV, acting, books, bow ties, or whatever he wants to do? He'll be successful either way. But with Ray, it's an interesting thing. He's at the midway point of his contract right now. He's got 2 years left, where in the last year of his contract, you want to move him to the middle then and try to get that. I think if you're going to move him to the middle, now's the time instead of waiting a year.
Okay, no, you don't see Brandon Johnson back because he's actually, production-wise, I think he's a little better than Keith Rivers. He seems to make a lot of big plays, but Keith Rivers is a ninth pick. He's going to continue to get opportunities to be the starter. Do they let a guy like Brandon go when Keith really hasn't come of age, so to speak?
I tell you what, it would be interesting to see a start if they could move Brandon to Sam, and you got a 3-man linebacking core: Brandon, Ray, and Keith. I think one Johnson will be a strong side linebacker next year. And you've got the work rules in place here. If it's the 10 work rules, Brandon's back for one more year too, which I think is very frustrating for Brandon because this is his third year on a restricted tender, where he's like, I've done everything I've wanted to do, or I've shown what I've needed to do here, including being a special teams captain last year. And the years are starting to slip away as far as how he can cash in an unrestricted free agency. But If you could do Brandon, Ray, and Keith back there, I think that would be a formidable. That would be a very interesting linebacker core.
Well, that's cool. You think it? You think they turn it back around next year? I mean, do you see it? I mean, I think the quarterback position will somehow work out. I think they can get a veteran. They don't really have to draft a quarterback high. I don't know. I think they can turn it around. You know, a lot of guys coming back off injury. I don't think they play well being a favorite at all. You know, when they're the underdogs, I think the Bengals, they fight a little harder. Last year, they just didn't have the same chemistry. They go back to how they were in '09. I think they can turn it around. What about you?
Yeah, and I think they got to re-sign Cedric. If they re-sign Cedric, I think this offense isn't going to be as bad as it was last year. Because I think I kind of see Jay Gruden kind of running what Brad Childress did in Minnesota as far as that West Coast, but it was a West Coast that was physical and run-based. I kind of see a lot of those qualities maybe developing with this offense. And you get a veteran or you get a rookie at quarterback, you know, the offensive line's going to be tested, but you get some formidable receivers, a running game, and I think this defense kind of gets back to the way it was. I think the defense kind of believed too much it was a top 5 defense instead of going out and showing it. And when they got hit in the mouth in New England, in that Atlanta game too, I think when they got hit in that comeback against Tampa Bay and Cleveland, once that avalanche started, you couldn't stop it. But I think Zim is back to being Zim. This defense has the chip again, and I think they'll be better. And when you look at the schedule too, they're facing the NFC West next year. They should at least win 2 games or go 3-1 or sweep that division the way they've done against NFC in the past. AFC South's going to be interesting, but you know they got to go to Denver. They're rebuilding. They'll get Buffalo here. There's that long losing streak, but that'll be good. And you know the division's going to be tough, but there's a chance to be a 6, 7, 8 win team, or maybe better. But this team has to get its chip back and figure out just what they want to be.
Well, that's true, and that comes from the coaches as well. They got to get a system and stick with it. I know defensively they have a system, but offensively they got to figure out what they want to be. Because last year bringing in the receivers and then saying you still wanted to be a running team, I don't think they did it the right way. But I think the coaches can get back in the same consistent groove, get the quarterback position settled with a veteran, not necessarily Carson Palmer. I think they'll be fine. But Joe, appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on, sharing a little bit of your info with us. You got anything big coming up in the paper in these next 2 weeks for the draft?
Just blogging every day, and we'll have the last 2 series of the Sunday draft series. We'll do the quarterbacks this week, and then 4 or 5 days before the draft, we'll kind of do the history of Bengals' top 10 picks and how everything's gone from there. But we'll start taking a look at past draft classes, look at teams' needs throughout the league, and, you know, kind of doing the GPAs on how teams have drafted too. I think the last 2 years, Bengals have done solid, but, you know, kind of developing as a whole. And, I mean, the one thing I'll probably do during the next 2 weeks too, not just with the Bengals, but throughout the league, you look at that 2005 draft class, that was a star-crossed draft class that's almost like the lost year draft class for a lot of teams. That a lot of them, that didn't just hurt the Bengals, that hurt a lot of teams as far as players who really didn't pan out that year.
And it's a shame for the Bengals because those guys play well here. I mean, David Pollock played well, and even though it took him a while to come on, at the end of that season, he was a player. Odell Thurman was a player from day one. Chris Henry was a player from day one. John Fanene came in, and he played pretty well. Tad Perry, I mean, so I read something online today that said like Odell Thurman was a bust. I'm like, no, that was a failure. That wasn't a bust. Those guys could play. So the Bengals really they took a risk on a lot of guys that year that could play. So, you know, that you're right. That '05 draft class, I really think put this team. It took a lot of wins from this team in the years, you know, going forward.
But the funny thing is, they've got 2 first-rounders of that '05 draft class, just guys they didn't draft it who have ended up playing pretty well for him, and Cedric and now Pac-Man, and they had Matt Jones in camp last year, so it was almost like an '05 draft class reunion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it definitely was. But yeah, I think the Bengals have drafted. They drafted well. I think developing players have been another thing. Guys like Keith Rivers, who still haven't really taken that step to where he should be. It took Jerome Simpson 3 years to get on the field. Things like that you just can't have because right now you're not supposed to be talking about drafting a linebacker. Your linebacking core should have 2 studs, and you could just fill the other position in, and your receivers should be fine with Caldwell and Simpson. But every team faces that. I know a lot of people get down to the Bengals, but a lot of teams face the same thing. But Joe, man, I appreciate it. I won't hold you on too much longer, man. Thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, man.